Good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Strategies for Launch Success, Considerations for a Commercially Successful Biopharmaceutical Launch in Europe. My name is Edward and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive and webinars work best when you're involved, so please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for future download. A big thanks to Syneos Health who helped develop the content for today's webinar. Syneos Health is the only fully integrated biopharmaceutical solutions organization. Their company, including a contract research organization and contract commercial organization, is purpose-built to accelerate customer performance to address modern market realities. Created through the merger of two industry-leading companies, INC Research and Inventive Health, Syneos Health brings together more than 21,000 clinical and commercial minds with the ability to support customers in more than 110 countries. Together, Syneos Health shares insights, uses the latest technologies, and applies advanced business practices to speed customers' delivery of important therapies to patients. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. Alex Fink brings more than 19 years of experience in strategy consulting to Syneos Health. He is the Managing Director for Commercial Strategy and Planning in Europe. Alex has conducted more than 120 engagements in strategic topics with clients globally in areas of commercial excellence, go-to-market strategy, and growth strategy, and has also supported over 40 product launches in his career. Prior to joining Syneos Health, Alex has worked in principal positions with companies such as Oliver Wyman, Monitor, and Roland Berger. He studied business administration in Germany, the UK, and the US. Jackson Carroll is a senior engagement manager in the Munich office of Syneos Health's commercial strategy and planning practice. Jackson has over 15 years of consulting experience and has developed local European market strategy, planned and supported launch and designed commercial models for leading pharmaceutical and healthcare companies in Europe and internationally. Jackson's consulting experience is in diverse therapeutic areas including diabetes, oncology, and hemophilia, and he has worked for clients in the UK, the US, Germany, Turkey, Thailand, and Belgium. Jackson also holds an MBA with distinction from London Business School. Tunisia Moodley applies her 15 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry to assist clients of Syneos Health's commercial strategy and planning practice. Tunisia is a senior engagement manager and launch expert, having developed launch plans and managed the launching planning process for several assets, including conducting launch audits and undertaking launch risk identification and mitigation planning. She has also undertaken market opportunity assessments, completed due diligence, defined go-to-market strategies, and developed affiliate commercial models for clients. Tunisia completed her Bachelor's of Honors degree and a Master's degree cum laude in biochemistry at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. She holds a PhD in molecular pharmacology from Imperial College in London. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to hand the mic over to Alex Fink, who will be starting off today's presentation. Alex, you may begin when ready.
Many thanks, Edward. So first of all, hello everyone from a very sunny day in London. As you know, my name is Alex Fink, and it's a pleasure to welcome anyone on behalf of Syneos Health to this webinar today. And we will focus particularly on the question, how can we make pharmaceutical launches successful in the European markets? Before we dive into the topic, just a few words on our company. Edward already talked a bit about that. Some people might not have heard about our new name yet, but might be familiar with our former brands, INC Research and Inventive Health. So the new brand, which we actually proudly launched on January 4th this year, is Syneos Health, and we regard ourselves as the only company which can uniquely deliver end-to-end solution to its pharmaceutical clients, ranging from clinical development through real-world evidence through commercialization. Most importantly, we have set up the organization in a way that we work integratedly to allow access for our clients to the combined knowledge of our organization, both in clinical as well as in commercial topics.
So we'd like to start out by talking through a couple of launches that were not commercially successful, despite the products gaining reimbursement in European markets. This is to highlight the importance of launch strategy and its foundational elements, as well as for launch planning. The first product is Continuum, or Epizen, launched for diabetes in both the US and EU in 2014. It entered a large but competitive market of GLP-1 agonists, and although there were significant price discounts to entrenched competitors, the drug did not gain much market traction. Revenue did not meet expectations, and in the latter half of last year, the company announced that the product would actually be discontinued. Apart from product differentiation, learnings here are the importance of really understanding the market and competitors well, to continually keep up with changes in the market, to adapt your strategy accordingly. It's also necessary to have a long-term vision, as diabetes was not a focus area for the company, whose core therapeutic areas are actually respiratory, HIV, inflammation, and oncology. The other example we'd like to raise is Amgen's Repatha, which was approved for primary hypercholesterolemia or mixed dyslipidemia in 2015. It was actually a first-in-class drug and beat Praluent to market by having a really coordinated and tightly managed launch plan, but payers have been reluctant to cover it even with significant discounts, and this is due to a perceived lack of benefit. Note that it is actually a clinically efficacious drug, and it reduces cholesterol more effectively than statins. But in areas like cardiovascular disease and diabetes, it's these days essential to have outcomes data in order to be successful, and this Repatha did not have at launch. So while NICE, who is very strict on reimbursement decisions, did actually approve it, clinicians weren't convinced, and they've actually requested that NICE reverse its decision, because the NHS would need to treat 74 people for 2 years in order to delay a single heart attack or stroke. But now, more recently in August, Amgen demonstrated CV benefit in a very small subset of patients, and analysts are expecting this to still have just a limited commercial impact.
Thank you, Tanisha. So there are many, many differences between the healthcare markets of European countries other than simply language. You know, each country obviously has its own reimbursement system, and there are other local and regulatory and legal requirements. But let me just focus on a few structural differences that influence the commercial model that a company could adopt. So Germany's healthcare system is very dispersed. There's a large number of regional and local hospitals with many office-based physicians. In some areas, the number of office-based physicians generally located outside a major city in some therapy areas could be as high as 40%. Given the dispersed nature of physicians, it's important to understand the location of the key physicians in your therapy area, possibly by doing some density mapping, and then also adopting the correct model to engage those physicians. Biopharmaceutical companies typically use large field forces to engage physicians, but in Germany, things like digital and multi-channel engagement should be considered, and it's increasingly critical. What's important is to have the right model to engage the right physicians, driven by value and return on investment. By contrast to the German healthcare system, the UK's NHS, or National Health System, is very centralised. In a number of therapy areas such as oncology, physicians are focused in a finite number of treatment centres and quite centralised. Additionally, public sector NHS physicians in the UK are pretty much exclusively in hospitals and not offices. So on one hand, it makes engaging the physicians more efficient in the UK. The field force, there's a specific number of locations where the field force can meet the physicians. On the other hand, the focus on multidisciplinary teams of physicians and specialist centres means that the actual prescribers may not be the key decision makers on which treatment the patient receives. The doctor's name may be on the prescription, but the doctor may be taking instruction or just the opinion of another physician. So understanding the influencing networks, although complicated as they might be, is key to success in the UK. So the true influencers, true decision makers may not be the ones who put their names on the prescription. If we look at Scandinavian countries, decreasing access to physicians in Scandinavian countries means that it can sometimes be quite difficult to get appointments to even see physicians. The field force may have to make appointments with specialists in treatment centres, 3, 6, or even 12 months in advance. The discussions in those centres between sales reps and physicians will be hour-long, focused on scientific detail. And as a result, success in Scandinavian countries requires a very well-educated, well-trained sales representative who can engage physicians in quality, in-depth discussion. So these are just 3 examples of diversity across European countries. You can imagine that as a result of some of this diversity, and this is just a sample of that, as a result of this, many new biopharmaceutical companies simply choose to out-license in Europe, given the complexity of the European market.
So with the differences between the countries in the EU, we've identified a few things that companies can do to launch successfully in the region. First, it's important to engage early in order to understand the market as well as prepare the market. This means engaging with KOLs, physicians, and other stakeholders involved in diagnosis, treatment, and follow-up early on in order to learn about the specificities of the market in each country, but also to raise awareness and educate stakeholders. And this is particularly important for rare and ultra-rare diseases where awareness may be low. One way to do this is by conducting clinical trials in all key markets. And as market information is hard to come by for rare diseases, having MSLs on the ground early on could also help with building market understanding on top of raising awareness. In addition to market preparation, organizational governance is really key. Clear roles and responsibilities should be defined for global, regional, and country teams. And this is something we see many of the smaller companies who are starting out struggle with, because they underestimate the importance of clarifying who's responsible for what and who can make certain decisions. Lacking a clear governance can lead to a lack of accountability and a sense of not being empowered or a decreased motivation, and it can ultimately lead to misalignment, where important things might actually fall through the cracks and cause risks to the launch, including delays to the launch when important issues are not actually escalated or dealt with in a structured manner. Last but not least is actually the need for tailoring at the country level. As you know, the patient journey inevitably has some country specificities, whether this be where the patient presents, where the treatment is concentrated in key centers or dispersed across the country, and the specialty of the treating physicians. So your commercial model or engagement strategy may need to be market specific, as may be the main audience for your messages. And this is crucial to understand at the country level in order to deliver the right message to the right customer.
Thank you. So when asked by clients, we outline 4 key strategic considerations that ultimately make a biopharmaceutical product a commercial success. So there's goal setting, there's your target markets, the winning strategy, and also just aligning the capabilities with your aspirations. So the first point, goal setting. It's important to understand what are our goals and aspirations for the product. This isn't a purely conceptual exercise. It's very important to add some data to this. What we're interested in is how and where patients are currently treated. We want to know, how does our product compare to other marketed pipeline therapies? And most critically, what behavior needs to change in the market in order for patients to receive our therapy? That's probably the most important question we want to answer. And understanding how patients are currently treated and how our product compares is essential to making those decisions, and also allowing us to set appropriate goals for our therapy. With regards to target markets, we want to understand where we will play. Which regional markets will we compete in? Quite often the answer to that is most of them or all of them in Europe. But we want to understand within that, which segments of physicians should we specialize in, or should we focus on in selected markets and target. We also want to understand which patient types or patient situations we should prioritize. Now, there are different ways to break down the patient. There's the symptoms of the patient, the characteristics of the patients, the epidemiology, but we can also think about patients in terms of attitudes, beliefs, and most importantly, behaviors. So important that we ascertain, once we say what our goals are, where we want to play, which particular positions we should target, and which patient situations we should prioritize. Following that, we need to understand how we will win in those chosen markets. How do we define a winning strategy? And it's important that we build on the previous analysis here. So what messages will encourage physicians to change their prescribing behavior? Once we know what the prescribing behavior is, we can start to think about who our target physicians are and what messages we need to put out there to change that prescribing behavior. Equally important is how we engage those physicians. How we engage those physicians depends a lot on who the target is. A primary care physician will have a very different amount of time to focus on learning about new therapies than a specialist. They'll have different ways in which they want to engage. We'll have different levels of resources we can put into that engagement. And so it's important to understand what their preferences are, what the preferences are of the target physicians we're interested in focusing on. And then we want to align our capabilities to our aspirations. So what capabilities must be in place to win? So we should think about what's the size and structure of the field force on the basis of the previous forecast, the analysis. And then we can start to say, well, what's the best way, the best partnership strategy to do that? Should it be to go it alone? Should we partner? And if so, what type of partnering should we do? Partnering these days is a continuum. And it's important that we think that through and base that on the data that we've already captured. If we just progress to the next slide, I want to talk about, on that first bucket, goal setting. How do we actually determine what our aspiration is, how and where the patients are currently treated, and how our product compares to other products in the market? Where will that be used? And on the next slide, we can see how we start to establish those aspirations. One of the earliest pieces of analysis we recommend at a country level is a patient journey analysis, ideally at a country level, if that's possible. Basically, we want to quantitatively map out the journey that a patient will take from presentation with symptoms to end of care. We start with a map of the patient journey. And through the various, take it through the various steps, which we build up with secondary research. We can then refine at a country level using qualitative or ideally quantitative primary research, what each of the specific steps are and how they vary by country. We think it's very important to work on quantitative primary research for two reasons. One is it's important to ideally understand at a country level how many patients there are at each step of the treatment journey. And this is largely for forecasting and understanding where specific interventions should be made. It also allows us to gather insight at each level, insight on how important that step is and what might influence that step and what might be the influence of adjusting certain steps at each step in the patient journey. So as you can see from this, patient journey analysis is often the first piece of analysis that we recommend clients do to really understand their market, understand how and where patients are treated, and understand what kind of interventions they could make in order to be successful and successfully launch the product. If we step through the next slide, I just wanted to highlight the key key benefits of doing patient journey analysis. There's 3 reasons why we highly recommend that biopharmaceutical companies do this type of analysis. First of all, it identifies critical stakeholders in each therapy area and country that might otherwise have been unknown to the company. So a recent piece of patient journey analysis that we undertook in a European country in rheumatoid and psoriatic arthritis highlighted some interesting stakeholders for the client. Treatments for rheumatoid arthritis, generally given by infusion, generally administered by a nurse, and the views of that nurse, how well educated and well trained the nurse was on a specific infusion device is key. It's not uncommon to find that the role of an allied healthcare professional is critical in the eventual treatment decision, and as such, a specific intervention can be divined to influence that point. We can provide nurse training, hiring nurse education team, do a series of different interventions we could make in order to influence that leverage point. And so understanding the critical stakeholders is key in any piece in launching a biopharmaceutical product. Patient journey analysis also identifies those leverage points, those critical stages at which behavioral changes lead to the biggest disproportionate yield. Obviously, winning the treatment choice is key. We want physicians and other stakeholders to choose our products when they have to prescribe, but having a quantified patient journey allows us to highlight an earlier step in the treatment flow that might actually influence the decision on which therapy is chosen at a later stage. Diagnostic tests are a great example of leverage points. When the physician has to decide which therapy to give a patient, whether or not the patient has had a specific test at an earlier point can actually influence the treatment decision. Quantitative patient journey analysis will allow us to highlight these types of leverage points where specific interventions around diagnostic tests, for example, can influence a therapy choice at a later step. A specific intervention I'm thinking of would be increasing the availability or capacity of diagnostic testing, and that can have a positive influence on later treatment. Last of all, quantitative patient journey analysis enables the quantification of potential product usage, which drives more accurate forecasting. So a lot is going to be driven off the forecast. The commercial model, the field force in country, specific marketing investments. It's really important to have a good forecast to make the appropriate investments. So it's for these 3 reasons that we encourage new biopharmaceutical companies to do patient journey analysis in their specific therapy area, ideally at a country level, in a quantified way at the earliest possible stage to understand that therapy area. If we progress to the next slide, I'd like to talk a bit about target markets. So when we've identified the leverage points, we need to determine which specific physicians and which patient segments we will target within that. Segmentation aligns the team on which patient and physician segments to target for maximum uptake. I'm sure that many of the people on the webinar are familiar with segmentation, but there are 2 key points that I want to emphasize. First of all, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with attitudinal segmentation, where we segment physicians primarily on their attitudes. We think it's a lot more important to focus on behavioral segmentation. Attitudes are interesting, but behavior is critical. Marketing seeks to design interactions with customers to reinforce or change their behavior. So understanding their behavior and being behavior-led is key. At the end of the day, we're interested in influencing behavior. We're not as much interested in attitudes. You can actually change behavior without attitudes. So being behavioral-led is key. The other aspect of this is we think it's important to identify those patient characteristics, those patient situations, and not just the physician situations. It's important to understand when a certain type of patient is in front of a physician, what is their likelihood to prescribe the new therapy we're looking to introduce. So I think it's important that we do a quantified segmentation to identify both the physician characteristics, but also the patient characteristics that we would like to focus on. And doing this kind of analysis allows us to highlight which specific physician characteristics and patient situations we should target. If we progress to the next slide, so why do we recommend this? What are the benefits to segmentation? Well, first of all, we identify the most attractive physician and patient customers for a specific brand in a specific market. Obviously, we can. It's quite simple to identify the largest segments, but what we're interested in is identifying the most attractive physician and patient customers for our particular therapy area, and we can look at that in terms of the largest segments, but we can also do that in terms of the highest priority and likely to prescribe, and where we should focus on first and how we should phase that. So it's important that we identify the most attractive target physicians and patients. We also want to identify any barriers and drivers to uptake. That'll support optimal message development. The key is to get the right messages to the right physicians, and so identifying their barriers and drivers will allow us to do that. And last but not least, we want to get some critical insights around the most effective way to activate those customer types. So physicians will have just different preferences on how they engage with information, what kind of information influences them, and we want to gather those insights for the specific segment that we're targeting. So an effective segmentation will allow us to do that, and that's why we feel at this stage an effective segmentation should underpin the key marketing efforts for any given brand.
Thanks, Jackson. As Jackson alluded to, it is essential to map and understand for each of your key markets what are the key physicians you need to focus on. What are the right messages which resonate and address the key needs of these physicians for each of the selected segments. The big question, though, in today's world, as we know, information is no longer limited or exclusive to one kind of stakeholder group or even to one kind of channel. So what we know in this digital world we live in, information communication is more transparent than it ever was. And this leads to a very high need of consistency. And when I speak of consistency, I refer to consistency across different stakeholders, across different channels, as well as across different markets. And when you think about the complexity in Europe, you might even get a much better sense upon why this complexity is key. So how can this kind of consistency be ensured in an organization? What we recommend to our customers is to try to develop a unified messaging platform. And what we mean by unified messaging platform is laying the foundation for all messages which are delivered by either medical, marketing, or market access to its customers by understanding what are the key archetypes we are communicating to. What is the kind of key message sequence which resonates with each of the stakeholder groups, and what are the right messages in terms of having the kind of messaging themes which get delivered in the key detailed localized messages to each of the stakeholders in each of the markets. So how this is actually done, the importance here is an alignment and involvement of all the three functions. As we all know, there are certain barriers which sometimes limit the kind of collaboration between the three functions. However, what you can do is to bring everyone together in creating a unified understanding of the narrative for your product, as well as from there that identifying and developing the key kind of messaging platform whereon every function can develop the key message sequence for each of their stakeholder groups, which then can be in the second step gets localized in the markets. So how does this translate? The important thing here is really to understand the different customer groups. And this involves from our perspective, an analysis based on both primary and secondary market research for all of the key stakeholders to understand their distinct needs. However, if you bring together all the three functions, it allows to develop that kind of cross-functional set of key messaging themes, and in the end, to deliver that kind of guidance you need to your customer-facing staff to allow to have content which is custom-made for every stakeholder group and every marketing. So what we often recommend to our client is that the unified messaging platform is developed in the central functions, be it either on a global or on a regional level, and then being laid out to the countries where the localization is then done and the final messages are delivered to the customers.
Thank you, Alex. So we've developed, we've set our goals, we've identified our target, we've developed our strategy, and so then the question is, how do we align the capabilities of the organization to our aspiration? Well, there's a continuum of partnership possibilities to consider for building the commercial organization we need to make our product a success. And the continuum can be measured on two dimensions. One is profit potential and marketing control from low to high, and the other one is financial risk, financial commitment and risk. So at the lower end of the scale, out licensing, completely out licensing your products to a larger partner is a possibility. And at the other end of the spectrum is go it alone. When you launch it yourself, build your own team, your own field force, and launch the product, take the product yourself to the market. What's important to emphasize is it is a continuum, and even within each of these buckets that are outlined on the slide, there are a series of different options as to what degree you can do that. For example, having a contract commercial organization, that can be quite a large team, or it can be just the field force, or it could just be in specific regions you want to use a contracted commercial organization. So there's a spectrum of options to consider when deciding whether or not you'll partner in a particular region and what kind of partnership arrangement you want to undertake. So the question is, how do we decide what kind of option we would like to pursue? So on the next slide, we just outlined 3 areas of consideration on partnering decisions. It's not just about the financial benefits that a partner might bring or the size of the partner. We recommend looking at 3 aspects. One is the therapeutic area. So how much investment will require in that particular therapeutic area? So some smaller specialist indications have a number of concentrated call points, and it's possible to address the therapy area with a small field force and a very small team. Obviously, in a broader indication, something in CV or diabetes, in a new geography where language considerations are key, it might make more sense to partner with a big provider, a big company, a big pharmaceutical company that has a large established field force in that therapy area. So therapeutic area is a key concern for deciding on the partnering approach. I think access to capital as well. So a smaller company will have less capital, presumably, and there'll be more demands on that capital. So can we access the capital to build the necessary commercial capabilities and invest in other priority areas at the same time? A new pharmaceutical company will probably have a pipeline of assets, and they'll need that capital to continue to develop those assets and be committed to continual future growth. So access to capital is another concern. A partner's value, or the value that a partner brings, is important as well. A partner will be more established and they'll have relationships. So the question is, would an established partner be more favorable than commercializing ourselves? So partnering with a large company will provide a lot of value and many more benefits other than just the financial arrangements. What's important here is that these 3 considerations should be based on fact. And a lot of the analysis that we recommend at steps 1 to 3 will allow us to make the appropriate decision around what partnering strategy we should take. So out-licensing isn't an option that we would recommend in the absence of information. It's actually going to be based on that information. The other point I just want to make is that it's very important that when making the partnering decision, that you don't just consider the financial benefits that a partner will bring. You also need to consider what relationship benefits they will bring, what their size will bring. What else do they bring to the relationship other than simply financial benefits? And that's important when making the partnership decision.
Thanks, Jackson. So here's a summary of how these 4 key considerations and conducting the relevant supporting analyses actually contributes to launch success. First, having a thorough understanding of the market, and which includes your customers and competitors, and also evolving the knowledge continuously as the market changes. It allows you to adapt your clinical trial strategy to differentiate your product and to refine your launch strategy as needed. It also allows you to develop a realistic forecast, and in our experience, having an unrealistic forecast is one of the main reasons we see for missing launch expectations. Determining target markets enables the best return on investment, and these include targeting countries which have the highest patient numbers or where it's quickest to get reimbursement. Having a clear patient profile so physicians know which patients will benefit the most, and targeting the right healthcare professionals so you are able to influence physicians who are the actual decision makers. Defining the strategy means you correctly position your product amongst competitors and have clear, simple messages that resonate with each target audience, whether those are physicians, nurses, or payers. And assessing your capabilities and having a long-term vision will enable you to establish the optimal go-to-market strategy in line with your company's aspirations and current resources and capabilities. It also lets you make the best decision at the time on whether to build your own organization or whether you should consider outsourcing or partnering if necessary.
Thanks, Tanisha. Another point I wanted to quickly talk about is how do you achieve launch excellence in your organization? And especially having in mind, you might want to launch in an untapped region. Whatever an untapped region is today, we would like to focus very much on Europe. An untapped region could also be stepping in a new therapeutic area or stepping in areas where you haven't worked in before. When we think about what does it take to make sure a launch is really successful, we think about 3 different things. First is to think about how do you best prepare your product. And what we mean by that is to be able to know your stakeholders, to really make sure you collect all the necessary insights on your stakeholders to inform your product strategy. Second, to generate the meaningful evidence which translates your strategy into clinical practice, because only if it's relevant for the physician's daily practice, it will resonate with them. Thirdly, definitely make sure you prepare and secure your regulatory approval. That is an area we're not touching today in greater depth, but something which we help our clients. But today, as we focus on commercial, I'd like to focus on a few other things. On point number 4, establish effective value proposition messages. We talked about that it's key to understand your patient journey. It's key to understand your physician segments, and from there develop the right messages for your product, and really think about how you can maximize your commercial lifecycle potential. Second, make sure you prepare the market, which sounds like a very complex exercise for you, but I hope we have shown some ways how you can reduce that complexity by combining analysis, by making sure you have a consistent way of how you collect information, how do you summarize information, how do you develop guiding unified messages which can be implemented in each of the markets. But most importantly, It is to make sure you define the success factors for each of your markets and to make sure you build the necessary advocacy with your stakeholders in the markets where you want to commercialize your product. And finally, something which we often see, which is underestimated by clients, is to think about how to best prepare your organization. And Jackson did talk about multiple ways of how this can be done, either by establishing your own organization, by working with a partner, by even working with outsourcing solution providers who could help you with their market knowledge. But most importantly, it's important to build an effective customer-oriented commercial team in your organization, wherever that sits, but it has to be focused on really understanding the customer needs and making sure your organization gets aligned to these requirements and can execute on that strategy. Finally, think about the optimal supply chain strategy when you approach regions where you haven't worked in yet. Also here, there are various options how you can do this, from setting up your own supply chain to working with partners. But finally, having the infrastructure and the processes in place in your organization upon launch is key to make your launch a success. When we summarize everything we talked about today, I finally wanted to share some key conclusions around how can you, with some simple considerations which might sound difficult to execute on, make sure that you can build all the necessary knowledge, processes, and strategies to make your product commercially successful in Europe. First, primary research is one of the key elements which we found, because secondary research, past experience gives you a lot of information, but it's essential to make sure it's tailored to the questions you have around your specific product or your specific organization, and also making sure it's most current, and especially think about the complex market access requirements and their changes in the complex European markets. All this information needs to be current. Second, we always recommend to think about conducting country research on a country level, and also to think about how you can make sure it is done in local language by using the right experts. So you're also getting the critical nuances it takes to understand sensitivities and success factors in each of the countries, which in a second step then allows you to really localize your messages and your strategies to the market. Finally, when it's upon deciding how you actually commercialize your product in Europe, as I said, there are various options from go alone to partnering to out-licensing, but there's more than just the financial benefits. We see one of the critical aspects really understanding what is the local experience you need to build or any potential partner need to bring to your organization.
So bringing all of this together, we wanted to give you an example of a company which pulled off a truly excellent launch. And the example we've chosen is Merck's Gardasil for preventing HPV infection. Even though it was launched over a decade ago, it's still the launch cited by industry executives in conversations on successful commercialization and launch excellence. So here, Merck was able to very effectively prepare the product, the market, as well as the organization for this launch. In terms of preparing the product, they worked fully cross-functionally. Research and manufacturing communicated and coordinated well in order to ensure that the product was able to be delivered at the right place and the right time. They understood the market and the competition in depth, and they developed very simple messages that resonated with the respective target audiences for GPs, gynecologists, and mothers of adolescent daughters. And they anticipated the competition, so they managed to pre-position on niche Cervarix so that it never gained traction. so well that they dominated the US market completely, and in 2016, Cerberix withdrew because of really poor sales or low market share. In terms of the markets, Merck was essentially creating a new market with a game-changing concept of HPV prevention. They knew it would take time to develop the market, that is, to raise awareness and educate on the mechanism and benefits. So they started doing this a full 4 years before launch and ensured that key physicians were identified and educated so that on launch they had a steep trajectory instead of a very slow uptake. In terms of the organization itself, the leadership recognized the importance of the brand to the company's success. So it is well funded and they hired enough of the right resources. Also, the leadership aligned on expectations for the product and developed a realistic forecast, which means they did not miss their launch expectations. Because of the importance of the product to the company's success, they also started launch planning sufficiently early, a full 3 years ahead of launch. And finally, knowing the competition was hot on their heels, they have the analytics in place to respond rapidly and adapt the strategy and tactics post-launch. So you can see that no one thing done right ensures a successful commercial launch. It requires understanding the market, developing the right strategy, cross-functional planning, effective execution of that strategy, monitoring of performance, and then finally adaptation to ensure performance is in line with expectations. And with that, I'll pass the mic back to Edward.
Just very quickly before we open the floor for questions, I'd like to quickly talk a little bit about the kind of services we provide to our clients. I talked earlier about Syneos Health. The people you're talking to today are part of our consulting unit. And within our commercial strategy and planning practice, we have designed a suite of solutions and approaches which help our clients to tackle all the different commercial questions we talked about. So what you see here is the suite of services we bring to our clients to best support commercial decisions with our clients, for our clients. With that, I'd like to talk about your questions. So I turn it back over to X-Talks, which have hopefully collected a lot of questions from the audience, which we can address in the next 10 minutes. Thank you.
All right, and thank you very much, Alex, and to all our speakers for that insightful presentation. We have received some questions from the audience so far, and I'd like to get started with those. This first question asks, launches sometimes fail because of a lack of coordination between global, regional, and the country teams. Do you have any suggestions on how to coordinate these teams better?
That's a really great question, Edward. I'll take that one. So first, it's important to understand if coordination between the groups is really the main issue, or whether it's the lack of assigning clear roles and responsibilities, which is also critical. If miscoordination is indeed the issue, there's a few different aspects to this. First, when it comes to market research at the global level, markets should have the chance to provide input so that when global is developing the strategy, it encompasses insights from all the countries or all the key countries who can then adapt the global strategy accordingly. Another point to note is that when launch planning is done, it should factor in the dependencies of country launch plans on the global and regional deliverables and ensure that the plan is phased accordingly. So global also needs to start planning and developing deliverables early enough in order to allow time for countries to adapt. Another important point is that global should also review their launch plans with the first launch countries, and countries should review their plans with global when their time comes, so that they can ensure alignment between the market and global. Something that is often underestimated, but that is also really important, is that once a launch plan is developed and during the launch management phase, it's important to have the right people at the meetings and to have them at the appropriate frequency. So, for example, 2 years from launch, global launch team meetings might be monthly, and then you might have the first country's GM or launch lead also there. But after filing, and depending on the length of the regulatory approval process, frequency of those launch management meetings might actually be increased to bi-weekly, and maybe in the month before launch, they might even happen as frequently as weekly. So I hope that comprehensively answers the question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tanisha, for that in-depth answer. We do have another question here from another viewer asking, would you recommend that a US-based company with no presence in Europe always partner to launch in Europe?
I take that one, thanks, Edward. I think the answer is pretty simple, not at all. Because most important, before you can actually answer this question, is to understand how big is your market potential in Europe, which also applies for other markets you'd like to potentially think about commercially your product. Because only if you understand, first of all, your potential, and in the second step, also the complexity it takes to access these markets and to market your products, you can make an informed decision about potential investments and potentially finding the best way to building your capabilities in these markets. And even if the outcome of this in-depth analysis is still potentially partnering in Europe, it is important for all of the discussions with potential partners to be aware of both the market potential as well as about the complexity to be in a strong position in these partnering discussions.
All right, thank you very much, Alex, for that answer. Another question here asking, how long prior to launching in Europe should we look to build a European team, develop the necessary launch infrastructure, and any other required functions?
So this is Jackson here. Let me take that one because it's quite a simple answer. As soon as possible is the general answer, is when you want to start thinking about building the right infrastructure and planning for launch. I think planning for launch. I completely understand that companies can't start investing early, and there's a cost to that early investment. But thinking about launch and thinking through the launch and doing as much as you can in the country is important to start thinking about that as early as possible. Specifically, any insight you can gather on a particular country or region, on Europe or on the therapy area in those regions, it will lead to influencing your clinical plan. It'll allow you to do things like decide to have clinical trials in certain countries for the purpose of understanding those countries a bit better. So as early as possible is key. We always say to companies to start thinking about launch 4 years prior to launch, and to start really seriously planning for launch 2 years prior to launch. That's when 2 years prior to launch is when you want to establish, your launch PMO. You want them to be focused on a particular country. You want to have a launch plan in place. So 2 years prior to launch is when you really want to start getting very serious about launch. And that's we do work with a number of companies that sometimes do leave that process of preparing for launch a little late. And that has ramifications in terms of the uptake of their product and how successful that product is. So I hope that answers the question.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that answer, Jackson. We do have another question from another audience member. This viewer asks, could you please provide more context and explanation for the Tanzium launch failure?
I'll take that one, Edward. So Tanzium was a me-too GLP-1 anti-diabetic, and it lacked differentiation. It was launching into a competitive space where exenatide and liraglutide were already entrenched since 2005 and 2010, respectively. The product was given weekly versus liraglutide, which is given daily, so it was more convenient, but it wasn't as efficacious in lowering A1C, and it did not have any weight loss benefit. So competitors and competitors also demonstrated CV benefit, that is a reduction in mortality due to CV causes, but GSK showed only no CV risk. They did not show a benefit. So the product was significantly cheaper, but it had injection site reactions, and together with being not as efficacious, it did not gain traction in the market. So a number of lessons to be learned from this launch is really the importance of having an early and evolving market knowledge, of adapting your strategy based on clinical data versus your TPP, and also based on adapting based on the changing landscape. And on top of that, the need for outcomes data in the space. So it's also essential to do market research. When launching into a very competitive environment like this, it's essential to do the market research using the real phase 3 data to try and get an idea of the uptake of the product, and that would influence your decision to actually potentially launch or not. It's also important, when making that decision, to consider broadly your corporate and portfolio strategy, because as we mentioned during the presentation, diabetes was not a focus area for the company. So they might want to might have made more sense to invest in one of their focus areas instead.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for that answer, Tanisha. I believe we do have time for one final question here. And this question is, what specific considerations apply for rare disease drugs with regard to access and early reimbursement?
Yeah, I think this is a pretty complex question where I could speak about in another webinar, to be honest. I like to be pretty quick on some of the key considerations when you think about rare diseases. First of all, some of the analysis, when we think about understanding the current way physicians look at these diseases, is even more critical, because very often in rare diseases, there's literally no treatment available. And having a treatment or treatment option being brought to the market requires to understand how to open, or to first of all making physicians aware of that, and making physicians also accepting the benefit of the new treatment options you can bring. But market understanding is even more critical. When it comes to considerations on pricing, early access, etc., involving with the payers as early as possible is even key, because what you always try to do, especially in rare diseases, is to bring your drug to the patients to provide them benefits as soon as possible. But that requires support not only from physicians, but also for the payers. I hope that provides some of the considerations, but this is a fairly complex environment. Essentially, same steps with an increased focus on understanding of requirements with physicians and payers.
All right, thank you so much, Alex, for that answer, and thank you to all of our speakers for those answers and our audience for those wonderful questions. We've reached the end of the question and answer portion for this webinar. Before we conclude today's webinar, I'd like to pass the mic over one last time to Alex Fink for some final notes.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Irad. Again, I think there are three things which I like to the audience to go away with when you think about what are the key success factors to commercialize your product in Europe. First of all, engage as early as possible with your key stakeholders. And key stakeholders involve key opinion leaders, physicians, but also payers in each of the markets you target. Second, make sure you have a clear governance in place, and clear governance applies primarily to the functions and primarily require setting up a clear governance for the European market, independent on if you build your own organization or if you partner or outsource part of the work. Having that clear governance and clear responsibilities internally in place is one of the key success factors. And finally, make sure you give enough flexibility to tailor your strategies and tactics to the country requirements to make sure you address the specific country needs. Those are the three takeaways which I like to leave with the audience for today. I can only say thanks everyone, and feel free please to reach out to any of us at any point in time for further questions, clarifications, or discussions. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, and thank you, Alex. If we weren't able to attend to anyone's questions today, the team at Syneos Health may try to follow up with you after the webinar. If you have any further questions, please direct them to the email address showing on your screen. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's conference. You will be receiving a follow-up email from Xtalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. I just sent everyone a link in their chat box. You can say thanks to our speakers via Twitter using that link. So I encourage everyone in joining us once more and thanking our speakers. Thank you again to all our speakers for a wonderful presentation. We hope you found this webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone.